Thank you so much for joining us on this morning. I'm Atit Danak, Principal and Head for Zinnov Konex, the team which is presenting this particular session. Just as a quick introduction, I've been with Zinnov for about 3 years. I've been building this practice from ground up since early 2018. Overall, I'm a former entrepreneur, have spent the last decade working with entrepreneurs across the country, both in with family businesses and also the new age entrepreneurs that we speak about. A lot of stuff that we will be talking about today is very personal from a hands-on experience in terms of building different programs. For those of you who may not be aware of Zinnov or may not be too familiar, we are a 18 now 19-year-old global strategy and management consulting firm with a core focus on product engineering and digital transformation. At its core, Zinnov was built to help large MNCs like yourself to set up their global R&D centers outside home location with a view of tapping into talent at a very cost-efficient price points, but more critically with the perspective of being able to leverage global ecosystems, the best talent in the world, to build what you want to really build, not just for today, but also for future. Apart from large MNCs, we do a fair bit of work with private equity, with engineering services companies, and of course, with the startup ecosystem. We are sector agnostic, location agnostic, like any other consulting firm, with majority of our revenues today coming in from North American market, European market, and the Asian market overall. The presentation today is led by the CONES practice, which is open innovation practice in Zinnov, focused on helping corporates leverage these practices for tangible business outcomes. We focus on three broad streams. First is startup collaboration, which is to do anything and everything from investments, acquiring acquisitions to building commercial partnerships. The second aspect that we look at is intel innovation, where the intent is to share our learnings from the startup ecosystem, put those environments and those perspectives within a large corporate, so that we are able to really create new age products, with help of the employees in the company, and truly create a culture of innovation in the organization. The last aspect that we look at is academia partnership, where once again what we do is we bring in an element of innovation. The intent is to move beyond research, the intent is to move beyond talent acquisition, the intent is to move beyond individuals, but rather work with teams in these technology business incubators to build something which can be commercialized, and hence the word innovation and not invention, and to do so in a very cost effective way. Do it over a long period of time, especially in scenarios like deep tech, which have a larger and a longer gestation period and resource requirement which is there. Across the board, what we do is we help companies evaluate what the strategy is, figure out what is the most relevant approach for them in terms of working with startups or driving the innovation programs or working with academia, custom design the blueprints in terms of what would it look on the ground, get involved on day-to-day execution, and basis what's happening on the ground, make those tactical iterations which allow you to keep improving your odds of success. Some of the logos that you see on the screen right now are a combination of GICs, Indian MNCs, Indian startups, government bodies, trade associations, and global startup collaboration platforms that we end up supporting at Zinnov. We are extremely focused in terms of trying to figure out how to be a consultant and also be an operator. And the idea is to be an operator first before we start consulting people on what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. From an agenda perspective, we're going to keep it very, very simple today. Given everything which is happening in and around us, we thought we'll keep a very laser focused session, not get into too many panel discussions or fireside chats today, purely so that we can focus on the subject, try and answer as many questions that you have over the session itself, or send you a FAQ document right after the session. I'm going to walk you through a presentation which will talk about what's really happening in the Indian ecosystem, and then open the floor for Q&A. The presentation itself is going to be very, very simple. We're going to review what's the status of the Indian startup ecosystem. Predominantly, what we have done here is we have referred to our joint report with NASSCOM, a report that we have been writing for 7 years now, in terms of what's the annual end of the year state of the Indian startup ecosystem. But within that, we're going to focus a lot more on how corporates are leveraging the startup ecosystem. And from there, what are the insights, best practices that you may want to consider as you think about building your own startup collaboration programs. Just as a quick call out, we have intentionally not incorporated data for Q1 of 2021 on the startup ecosystem. And the reason is quite simple. The news that you have seen out there is pretty positive. It's only good things. So we said, we can make it more sweeter, we can make it more interesting, but that doesn't really solve the core problem that we want to do, which is, how can corporates really work with startups. So do bear with us on that one particular front, which is there. Okay, getting into the thick of things, a very quick snapshot. The Indian startup ecosystem, despite all the challenges that we had in 2020, partly in terms of what happened between India and China, and hence the decisions that the country made, which had impact in terms of what kind of investments could be raised or what kind of partnerships could be done. And then, of course, we had COVID-19, which had corporates, VCs, private equities all go into BCP, all go into pause state. And mind you, India as a country gets a fair bit of its investment from overseas markets. And the Indian ecosystem end of the year stood out very strongly as a shining beacon of hope, if I may say, in terms of its performance. We continue to be third largest ecosystem in the world, with an active base of about 11,000 to 12,000 companies. A startup here is a firm which is less than 5 years old. It is a technology-led company. It is a product company. It's a company which is already working with customers. These are not ideation stage companies. And there is a clear element of innovation. The innovation could be in terms of technology itself, it could be in terms of business process, or in terms of business model which is there. So it's a heavily curated set of about 10 to 11,000 companies active in the country today. The interesting piece was, regardless of the number of debt pooling which increased, in 2020, where companies had to shut down operations, the ecosystem overall has grown by about 8 to 10% annually. And we do expect that this percentage growth will continue to, be same, if not increase, over a long-term period of at least the next decade, which is there. The lesson on facts about the Indian startup ecosystem, however, are in terms of what kind of companies are there. Um, a very big misnomer in the ecosystem is that we only create B2C companies, whereas 45% of the startups in the country today are B2B startups. We do expect this percentage to increase to about 47 to 48 and then stabilize. Given India's nature will always be B2C heavy, so to say, but it won't be a huge delta over again a long term period which is there. We have companies in 25 plus sectors. We have companies who are almost about 28 to 30% of the companies whose primary market is outside India. These are companies which are built from the very beginning to be global firms. They're not built to be just Indian centric firms. And the founders are really aspirational in terms of what they want to do. In terms of sectors, and to give you a very quick view in terms of what's really happening out there, what we have is enterprise tech is one of the stronger areas in the country. This is a segment which has been consistently strengthening and growing. We do expect this will happen fundamentally is because from a IT services hub we are becoming into a software hardware product hub over a longer period of time. There has been a consistent improvement in the last 5 years since the startup ecosystem really came into being, with Flipkart becoming a unicorn. Over the course of close last 5 to 6 years, this percentage has really increased steadily, is what we have seen. The other segments that you see in terms of healthcare or fintech or education, which are the next top three sectors, are sectors which have a lot of tailwinds from the domestic markets. But what we are also noticing is a lot of solutions which are being built for India are proving to be extremely capable and relevant for global markets. And we are seeing more and more examples of this. For example, fintech companies by default end up going into Asian markets when they want to look at growth. Healthcare companies end up moving towards MENA region, towards Latin America region from a growth perspective. Education, interestingly, companies are moving towards North America and towards Europe, which is rather a lot more interesting piece today. The growth is pretty strong in each of these particular segments. While COVID has had its impact in terms of which sectors, have got tailwinds, which sectors have got headwinds. Overall, we do expect the top four sector, combination to remain more or less similar with 1 to 2% shift here and there. Just as a last call out, retail, where we see a lot of these unicorns, is actually not the biggest sector. But as the case would be, retail typically commands a higher valuation because it's consumer centric. Traditionally, consumer companies have always had higher multiples when they are valued compared to a B2B company, and that has a huge impact on valuation and, of course, the press media that we end up hearing. But they are not the most number of companies is something I would call out here. Now, from a location perspective, just as a broader piece, Bangalore, as expected, is the biggest city from a tech startup hub perspective. But interestingly, Delhi NCR is not too far away. What we have been noticing is that a lot more centers are coming up steadily, and they have their own approaches, they have their own pieces. And today, what you have is you have almost about, say, six cities in the country where there's at least one unicorn, which is there, right? So you have Chennai, which just added a unicorn, earlier this week with Charge B. You have Pune, you have Hyderabad, you have Mumbai, and this is was something we really believe will happen. This will get accelerated because of COVID, because of hybrid workplaces, remote working, and everything. Is that India, true to its size and true to its diverse nature, will not just be known for the Bangalore startup ecosystem, but the Indian startup ecosystem by itself will have a lot of different personas. Chennai will continue to become the SaaS center. Pune will keep going towards becoming an enterprise tech center for the country. I think First Cry would be exception here, but this is going to be the cybersecurity enterprise tech center for the country. Hyderabad is going to be somewhere between the two, enterprise tech and SaaS overall. Mumbai, Delhi will have a very, very huge consumer focus overall. Mumbai will have a huge fintech focus. And Bangalore will be the mix of everything else, right? Which is there. It just has the ecosystem to make it viable to test out different businesses and different sectors. The other part, the interesting part, however, is the ecosystem outside these major cities, what we call as the established startup hubs, which are Bangalore, Delhi, Pune, Chennai, Hyderabad, and Mumbai. If you remove these particular cities and you try to create a heat map of the country, you see a very clear distinction, right, in terms of what it was and what it is today. You see the heat map only getting more intense, and we could attribute that to time. But you would see how the states are really shaping up, right? You have Rajasthan, you have Gujarat, you have UP, a lot more states that you would not typically associate it with tech startups, growing really well. Um, and there are a lot of reasons for this. India is a country where technology innovation, yes, will be really really beautiful. It will help unlock and create businesses or unlock markets. Take for example Ola. While Ola and Uber are similar products, the hypothesis behind Ola and Uber is very very different. In case of Uber, it was about medallions and about sort of breaking the price of monopoly which was there from a taxi perspective. In India's case, when Ola started, for them, the need was a lot more simpler. Their need was simple access. It was not even about pricing power. It was just about the fact that you had to stand down on the road, wave down a taxi or a auto. You did not know what will happen. Not every city had a taxi union or a taxi stand next to your home that you could really call and wait for something to come in. The quality was not really great. So two different genesis points, similar solution, and if you see the evolution has been very very different. The point being that while technology innovation will be effective, we do believe that India is a country where more than disruption, it is creation, which is the narrative in terms of how you are really, bringing these markets online, how you're really expanding the markets, and that's where business model innovation is going to be extremely key. A lot of companies which are based outside major cities are focusing on that element, or saying that how do I make a business really viable at this particular price point, which India can offer, where technology also makes sense, but the business construct is what's really enabling people to come on board and be part of that whole change which is there. Take for example Misho, right? It's a social commerce website. What they have really done as part of their business design is to activate housewives to become resellers. They have activated students to become resellers. Uh, a fair part of it is business model, business process, and technology. While an innovator, a key enabler, is not the only or the real distinction why the business is really growing out there. Take for example Khata Book for same reason. A common question which keeps coming in from a lot of corporates is to say that, okay, how is the startup ecosystem doing from a deep tech perspective? The answer is it's positive. Yes, we are still behind Israel in terms of the quality of deep tech that we would have, and a lot of those pieces are related at an ecosystem level in terms of where Israel started when it started versus where India started. But that being said, all the leading indicators are very, very positive. All the core pipeline indicators are pretty positive in terms of more companies wanting to leverage deep tech, more companies wanting to deploy them into the solutions. One fundamental piece which I've seen very different in India, and this is what we are also noticing more and more with Israel's newer companies, is deployment of technology is not just for the technology's sake, it's for a business sake, right? So if it's not really growing your business, you may not really want to deploy AI, right? If statistical analysis really solves the problem, then you don't need a AI to execute on things. And this is where we are seeing Indian founders and investors to be a lot more aggressive, saying that, you know what, we can see AI from a marketing and packaging perspective, but is it really bringing in dollars or not? And that's going to be one very, very fundamental piece that you'll see in India. Given where we are in terms of our overall deep tech ecosystem outside startups, also given the kind of pressure, the questions investors ask in terms of, to an entrepreneur before they end up giving money, um, the technology application will be very, very business driven, is what we anticipate and expect. We have already seen a bunch of these companies close down between 2017 to 2019 period, where there was a lot of excitement about the technology, and then people are trying to figure out where to deploy it, and most of those businesses failed. So unless the business problem qualifies the tech, I think you will not see entrepreneurs being really excited. What it also means is, consequently, is that something like a blockchain in India, will not really accelerate till the time we start seeing applications. And there's proof point in that statement. We missed the complete ICO buzz, 2 3 years back. But what's really happened is that while the ICO market crashed, the core of the Indian blockchain ecosystem did not go away anywhere. Those people are still part of the ecosystem. And the recent announcement which came from Coinbase, which got listed, it's a crypto exchange which recently got listed in US. They are opening up a center in India in the coming days, and they have already announced their intent to acquire companies in India. And the logic is very simple. They feel that the Indian blockchain ecosystem has not really moved from its core, and hence it's really interesting for them to come and invest. So that would be one aspect I would say all of us sort of keep in mind. Overall, from a numbers perspective, we are third largest in terms of unicorns. Just to call out, this 38 is now 46 as on date in terms of 46 unicorns active in India. The numbers for US have moved to about 300 something, and the overall pool is about 600 plus unicorns globally. But 46 companies, what it means is that out of the 38, we had one firm, Hive, which sort of lost the unicorn status, but we added nine more unicorns in just last 4 months, which is there. Now, as part of this report, we had predicted that we'll have a unicorn club of 50 plus by end of the year. And we are really happy on one side that prediction is coming to be true, and even more happier that it's happening not end of 2021, but a lot earlier. But that being said, I think the important piece for us to remember is that eventually we are talking about Indian ecosystem. So while the ecosystem will always celebrate unicorns, the beautiful part, my personally favorite part, is investors, founders have started talking about profitability a lot more consistently than what used to happen in 2015 and 16. COVID-19 was the second shock that Indian startup ecosystem saw. So in 15 we had huge investments, 16, 17 it dipped. From 18 it started to recover, 19 was a great year, and then 20 happened again. So the narrative in the ecosystem right now is very, very simple that look, yes, we can build business on money, but we cannot sustain business on money. Um, what do we do as an ecosystem in terms of how we build our businesses, how we really grow? And that narrative is becoming more and more strong with each passing day. So the Indian way of building a startup is going to be slightly different. I think it'll still take about 4 to 5 years to really shape up. But you will see an Indian playbook of building a technology company where profitability will be as important as valuations, which are there. Um, Coming from a quick comment on the unicorns piece, again, it's a huge sector that we are seeing where unicorns are coming from. It's not just retail, it's not just B2C, it's not just B2B. Apart from the fact that we are seeing these unicorns coming from different sectors, we are also seeing a whole bunch of SaaS unicorns come out, which are global in nature. A whole bunch of these companies are B2B, and a fair percentage of them are not based in Delhi or Mumbai or Bangalore, which is there. The interesting part, however, here is what we call as the Indian playbook. And we believe that in India, when you want to really build a business, you are not really looking to build a business like a sequoia tree where you focus only on one product and you go really deep and you go tall and straight in terms of how your business is growing. The Indian style of building business is the banyan tree, right? You have a one core frame which grows, and then you start giving down more and more roots. And as those roots touch the ground, they have their own being, and the tree keeps growing, and it keeps growing from a size perspective, right? So you increase your shade. So you're not just going vertically; you're going horizontally also from a depth perspective. And this banyan tree approach is something we have seen across all the unicorns. Paytm had the Paytm Mall, Ola did Ola Electric, InMobi has Glance, unicorns birthing unicorns. Same thing you will see with Zomato in terms of its product portfolio or the recent round which Swiggy raised, where they raised about $800 million very recently. A core reason for that $800 million investment is not the food business, but the groceries business of Instamart, which is there. If you look at someone like Freshworks, the product side is fresh, yes, but they have consistently been making early stage acquisitions to add products into the portfolio, and those acquisitions are very central in terms of really changing Fresh Desk to Freshworks, where it has a suite of products and not just the ticketing system, for help desk. And that's something which is becoming more and more evident. So keep your eye on that. I think we'll see some really interesting surprises and companies coming out there. Overall, Unicorn Club in that particular sense is expected to expand. We have got a very good pipeline of companies who are growing steadily, who have the right amount of money to sustain themselves through the growth period to keep experimenting. And of course, all these firms are coming from different sectors and different areas, which is there. As the last few points, just to sort of let you know, one reason why we have been gung ho about the startup ecosystem ever since our report in October came with Tide, and then the follow-up report in January with NASCOM, is the fact that we have not just seen the numbers in terms of absolute investment value starting to come up, or in terms of the distribution of deals and the number of deals increasing. What we found really interesting was the fact that the average ticket size has been increasing consistently. And this is the true nature in terms of what we are seeing. So not only are you seeing the deals return, you are also seeing the average ticket size return, and this is the indication of confidence. The piece being that investors are anyways designed to go for a portfolio approach. They're anyways designed to take multiple bets, so these numbers can always go up. But if your average ticket size is not going up, then you're not really sure how confident they are about the ecosystem. This also reflects the entrepreneur's ability to command a premium in terms of the valuation that they are looking to see. Uh, to give you an example, a company which recently became a unicorn is a firm called Grow, which is into fintech, which is into securities, equity markets, investment platform, or wealth tech platform. The funny thing is this: Grow has gone 4x in valuation in less than a year. Their last round was at $250 million. This current round is about $1 billion plus. And in the center of it is not just the fact that the company has growth prospects as per the investors, but also the fact that the entrepreneurs are able to command a price. They are able to command a premium which is comparable to US markets and European markets which are there. Okay, now coming to the corporate ecosystem, what we all are pretty well aware of is that India has a unique advantage that we don't only have a great startup ecosystem, we also have a fair number of world's best, digital ER&D services provider, the product engineering services companies. We of course have the Indian MNCs, but advantage that we have had is folks like you, large global MNC R&D centers in the country. And furthermore, the interesting part there has been that whatever industry we may pick, what we are seeing people across the value chain being active in India. So at least theoretically speaking, today, if you are building automotive vehicle, you can potentially go to a Daimler, work with them and get certain inputs. You can work with Bosch DNA to do it. You can work with Intel plugin, Intel Direct to do it. You can work with Cisco Launchpad. You can work with Amazon Web Services to really create that particular product. Now, whether it happens or not in that particular sense for an entrepreneur, that possibility itself is a big advantage. Furthermore, what it does is it does open up, again, in theory and in certain cases in practice, the ability of different firms to be able to collaborate with each other, provided we solve for it, which is there. Now, this presence of global MNCs is something which is further, getting supported with the whole shift to open innovation structure. Traditionally, a lot of these partnerships were done by headquarters, where all the R&D centers would work with somebody at the headquarters, and they would eventually decide who they want to really partner with. But as the decision making itself gets decentralized, predominantly is because when a headquarters thinks about setting up R&D center, they also want to look at the ecosystem around that R&D center, and it sort of becomes a failure if you have to again shift all of that information to HQ and then get the decisions back in and then do something from an execution perspective, right? So this whole decentralization, the whole narrative in terms of not only looking for talent but also leveraging the ecosystem is getting converted into what we call the new age innovation fabric, where each of the R&D centers have their own networks. The headquarters has its own network, and what you're doing is you are sort of creating a web of information uh, and a web of decision making, which just allows you a lot more options in terms of what you really want to get done. Now, as we think of this particular piece, the question of course becomes is that you want to work with startups, or why do you want to work with startups? This is something all of you know, but just to sort of reiterate, I think the fundamental problem or the challenge that all of us are trying to solve for is this. We have had a consistent revenue which has been coming in, and we have been investing in terms of the cost of driving up that particular revenue. However, the reason this model gets disrupted is because your competition is moving a lot more faster, the technology is moving a lot more faster. Now there are two approaches. One approach is to take that hit, invest a lot more in terms of development which is there, and then figure out how to grow the company. Mind you, this is something which is not really reducing your risk, because typically companies end up investing a lot of dollars into specific technology. And the thing with technology is that it changes very, very rapidly. So even though we may feel that, hey, this is the thing, we're not really sure if the market is ready for it or the market will be ready for it. So there's a fair bit of risk which is getting involved there. Consequently, the core intent of a collaboration-led model, from a business sense perspective, is to say that, okay, look, I know my revenues might change because there is disruption which is going to happen. At the same time, I do want to create new growth opportunities, and at the same time, I really want to optimize my investments from a R&D dollars perspective. So the core hypothesis with open innovation has always been the fact that your development cost is optimized without you really sacrificing your opportunities from a new revenue perspective. Now, how do you really make it happen on the ground? How do you really solve for it? Of course, is the core challenge. But that's the core hypothesis, just to reiterate, right? Now, what it ends up doing is that it immediately allows us to understand that there is a need to have a very, very clear collaboration strategy out there. If you look at the Indian startup ecosystem, given the fact that companies want to keep growing, they want to keep innovating, given the fact that we have this ecosystem of companies active in India, we can also see, how companies are interacting with the ecosystem in terms of trying to engage with startups with a variety of objectives which are there. Some of them are doing through a structured program. Some of them are doing in terms of regular set of startup showcases or events which are there. Some of them have been able to create core capabilities which repetitively end up, creating these opportunities for POCs and translating them into commercial engagements. But all in all, there is a fair activity which is happening in the ecosystem. And those activities are happening across the board. There are companies like GE Healthcare, Amazon, Google, which are focused in terms of driving the adoption and evolution of their tech platforms. There are companies like Daimler, MG, which are focused on license and vendor agreements to accelerate product development or new launches. Some like Cisco, NetApp is focused a lot in terms of creating joint go-to-market opportunities out there from a business perspective. These could be for smart cities, these could be for enterprises or factories which are there. Someone like a Loge or a Musk is focusing a lot on co-innovation, because the kind of problem statements they want to go after, they're not able to find exact fit of startups out there in the ecosystem, but they really want to solve the problem because a fair bit of transformation the company is being driven from India, and they have been able to sort of create those success stories. The likes of Walmart, Ericsson, Intel have been focusing on acqui-hiring in terms of bringing a lot of core engineering capabilities inside the company, where they're not really paying for the revenues or the product, but they're focused on paying for IP. They're focused on paying for the quality of team which is there. And then these teams become a strong pod within the organization with a lot of ownership, both in terms of the objective and the resources associated with it to get the job done. And then, of course, you have the traditional equity investments and acquisition play, which is there, the classic forms of collaboration which have been there. Now, as a quick input for all of you, 2020 tough time. A lot of companies are focused on BCP. I think, pardon that aircraft flying over. Um, uh, yeah. So a lot of companies are focused on BCP in terms of what they needed to do. We lost the whole of quarter two more or less, which is the April, May, June period, because most decisions were not being made in India or globally. The second aspect was the fact that a lot of participation in Indian ecosystem happens from global companies. So you had now, companies figuring out what's happening in Europe and what's happening in US, and then trying to figure out what's happening in India. A fair bit of decision, were paused from execution perspective. That being said, we still had about 135 corporates being active in the ecosystem. We did see a drop in terms of the corporates investing in the country and the M&A piece which is there. But both these aspects are something we do believe that by end of 2021 we'll see a much more stronger number coming out. The one piece which, however, did accelerate was the number of companies engaging on open innovation aspect, looking to do commercial partnerships with the startups out there. As a quick view in terms of investments, while the these have been slightly lower in terms of what we saw. This was predominantly in terms of both Japanese, American, and European companies slowing down a bit. But the interesting piece, what we have seen is that there has been that uptick in early stage in terms of what the corporates have been doing. Again, a good indication of focus. And then there has been a slight drop in the late stage and the seed stage. We do anticipate that by mid of this year we will see seed and early pickup, and the late will really pick up in the third quarter of the year overall. From acquisition perspective, fundamental problem cross border. A lot of global participation ended up dropping out compared to what it should have been. Every geography that we have seen, whether it is North America, Latin America, Europe, what we have seen is through 2020, local to local kind of deals were happening a lot more. Those kind of acquisitions were really working out well, but cross-border acquisitions started to really reduce because of COVID-19. Most companies still are trying to figure out how to get a deal done in a semi-lockdown kind of environment. It's a huge investment, it's a huge risk, and of course, you want to be really sure of what you're doing. Unfortunately, the due diligence processes are not really designed for it right now, and that's where companies are focusing. That being said, we have seen some really big announcements already happen with Tata announcing one big basket acquisition, Tata Capital announcing one MG acquisition, and fair number of other pieces coming out into the market. So do anticipate the numbers for H1 and H2 of 2021 to be a lot more closer to 2019, if not more. We definitely expect them to be somewhere similar from a range perspective. Now, coming to the Open Innovation Program, which is the core story for today's objective, is just this nice jump that we have seen in terms of the number of companies collaborating with startups. Now, I just want to call out one thing here. Whether you may call it, incubator, whether you may call it accelerator, whether you may call it partner program, whether you may call it POC program, I think the common baseline is that these are structured programs which are there. Um, as another call out, one thing which we have found to be fairly difficult for a lot of corporates to sort of see if they're not gone really deep, is that a lot of companies call their programs accelerators, but they're not really accelerators, or they call them incubators, but they're not incubators in the truest sense. Unfortunately, in the global ecosystem, a lot of these terms have sort of I dare say abused in terms of what they're supposed to mean and what really ends up happening. Nothing wrong in how it is used, but nothing right. That's the core piece which is there. Now, the reason we say that is because what might be called as an accelerator can very much be a POC-led program, which can be very similar to a partnership program. What some would call it, or what someone would call as an open innovation program, is exactly same as another company's accelerator program. So, mind you, as you think about your own startup collaboration pieces. As you think about programs, the first thing you want to do is do away with all those acronyms. Only focus on things saying that is it structured, is it unstructured, what is the frequency at you with which you work, what is the objective with which you work, and things like that. Be sure that you keep the names aside as you think about your own strategy. That being said, fair number of companies, global MNCs are active in the Indian ecosystem. A very good percentage of that is run by GICs, and of course, because a lot of these GICs are based in some of these key cities, but naturally, that's where the density of corporate programs is. Overall, in nutshell, I think where we are today is that companies are finding it a lot more easier to pitch their startup programs to global. There's a lot more data, a better narrative, which is enabling them to not only go to the global but also secure those approvals that they end up requiring. Now, going back to my piece in terms of doing away with the words like accelerators and incubators, what you would see is that fundamentally these open innovation programs are a set of structured processes where you have three broad stages. You have a very strong hypothesis or a structure in terms of selecting a company that you want to work with. It is based on something which is important to you. It is based on something which is relevant to the company, and there is something that you can articulate in terms of what kind of impact it would make. Three core parameters which help you figure out which startup to work with. Now, the core of these startup collaboration programs is to say that, look, when I select a startup, it's still a hypothesis. There is a set of assumptions that I have taken. There are a set of risks that I need to really solve for. And what I'm really doing with that 4 month or a 6 month or whatever X month program which is there is to create a sandbox controlled environment, so to say, where I'm able to test out the hypothesis. And testing out that particular hypothesis is something which ends up requiring us to have a deep dive with the company in terms of what they are doing, figure out what kind of POC or prototype you want to really build out, have them build it, make sure that you have time for those iterations, and then you have this final demonstration which ends up happening to a certain set of key leaders who stand to benefit from that POC if it is deployed into the system. The advantage is that as you think of all these activities, you have almost all options of a partnership available to you, right? You can think about license of vendor agreement, you can think of co-innovation, and you can stop at that, right? If that POC is successful, that opportunity is tested, but you're also able to say that, look, this is great, it's helping my business, but it is not that big a competitive advantage, right? And hence I don't want to invest, right? At the same time, if you feel it's a great competitive advantage, you can very well acquire the company. And that's one fundamental advantage that an open innovation program provides you from a construct perspective. Typically, what happens is that these equity investments and mergers and acquisitions are done by different teams. You have a dedicated corp dev and CVC team which is focused on making these investments. However, where the startup program really sits is it sits as a core capability inside the organization, which is enabling not just the corp dev and the CVC team, it is also enabling each of the BUs or each of the geographical BUs to achieve their objectives. And mind you, these BUs can have their own perspective in terms of what works for them and what doesn't work for them. I would like to give an example here in terms of simplifying the concept, right? To my mind, a startup program is not really very different from a HR team in the organization. The HR team works with everybody in the company. For somebody, they are finding senior roles that they have to solve for. For some team, they are solving junior roles. For some people, it's contractors. For some people, it's interns. It can vary company by company, sorry, team by team, location by location. But what all of them do is they end up relying on that core team to really understand how to get the job done. Now, as a team lead, you would end up sending a particular job requirement to HR. They would refine it, put it into a job description, and push it outside into the into the ecosystem. And when they push it into the ecosystem, they push it on jobs board. They push it to their network of HR consultants, recruiters who are helping them in terms of filling the position. They have their own networks which are there. They collect all those resumes, they review those resumes, shortlist it, send across to you for review. You again review those particular resumes, you shortlist them further to, let's say, five that you want to really talk to. You talk to those five people. There's a set process in terms of who they end up talking to. You might give them assignment which is there, and then finally you choose one person that you want to really engage with. Now, in this whole process, the HR is the one which is telling that, saying that, hey, look, we need three-step processes. These are the four people you should involve from an interview perspective. This is how we do our compensation. This is how we, design our benefits. They are the subject matter experts. Now, you replace your job requirements with a problem statement. You replace the resumes with starter profiles which are there, and you would see the role is not very different. There's a lot of matchmaking. There's a lot of subject matter expertise. There's a lot of orchestration which is there, and there's a lot of coaching also which is required, as a new member in corporate wants to work with staff. That subject matter expertise, that core capability is what you sort of build for your startup program. And that's where it becomes fundamentally core to the company. And they have their own networks of how they're working with startups, incubators, and accelerators and investors. One challenge which we have seen in a lot of companies is, BUs tend to have their own networks, which is wonderful. I do a lot of hiring for my own team in Zinnov, so it does help. I can understand having your own network when I want to solve a problem. It's just easy for me to talk to a few people and get it done with. But from a company perspective, it's not really great because this network is very very BU dependent. It's very leader dependent. It's not a core capability. So what you would really want to do is to have a team which is designed and tasked to solve that problem for the company. It should sort of be the subject matter expert inside the company, and while you're doing that, you of course give the freedom to rest of the team to interact with the ecosystem. There's nothing wrong in it, but if we try to keep it very very view centric, do not, if not today then tomorrow, odds are those systems will start breaking and you will not be able to really leverage it as an organization. Now, for the companies who have been able to do this, we are already seeing a fair number of results out there in terms of success stories which are there, whether it's in terms of platform evangelization, whether it's in terms of doing license or vendor agreements in terms of solving problems or co-innovation pieces. We have been seeing a consistent set of companies out there talking about their success stories into deployments which are there. These are just a few examples. But I think two things I would really point out here is a fair number of these companies are looking at partnerships for deployments not in India but overseas. So we are talking about Europe, right? Over here, we are talking about global over here. Someone like Maersk and Bosch again is not just the domestic market, but it's a global market which is there, and that's the beauty. Today, you can sit in India, work with the Indian startup ecosystem, build solutions for global, which is something you anyways do on a day-to-day basis. Of course, there's one added advantage that because everything is virtual now, nothing really stops you as an organization or as a team to work with startups from Israel or from Southeast Asia or from Latin America and get the job done for global, right? It just gives you a lot more power today than it did. But the point is, it's possible in terms of what can be done. Um, Speaking of which, the next question then of course becomes is that how do you really start in terms of solving this particular problem? As I see it, at the core, what you're looking to do is looking to build out these startup collaboration programs as a capability for the organization, not as an activity. That framing is important because as soon as you call it as a capability, then what you are doing is you're consistently looking to build it up. You're looking to evolve it into something bigger. Doesn't matter where you start, but the core perspective is to build it into a capability, which means you make it stronger and stronger and consistent over a period of time. At the core, however, what would happen is that your odds of success will be very, very dependent, like any other activity, is in terms of the team that you're bringing in to execute on this. You, of course, want these folks to be a lot more mature in terms of how they work with startups compared to rest of the organization. That's the role they're solving for, that's their job. But you really want somebody who has seen that experience of being a former entrepreneur or being an open innovation specialist and working and realizing successes and failures to be part of your team to begin with. You want a set of people who also have their own offline network. The reason this offline network is important is because from my experience, we can always subscribe to a lot of databases, we can always be part of a lot of communities, uh, but a fair number of entrepreneurs are not part of these databases. They're not part of these communities, and that's the choice they have had. What really works in the startup ecosystem is this whole element where people get to know about somebody through referrals. That's how most of the investor deals happen. That's how some of the best startups have been discovered over a period of time. What you want is access, but more critically, not just access to the startup, but information in and around that particular startup. And that's where offline networks become really effective. And then, of course, technology companies solving technology problems. So you do need technology tools for the team in terms of keeping them effective in terms of the work that they're doing. And this is a combination of data platforms they access, insights that they end up subscribing to, workflow tools that they end up having. Again, very, very important to highlight. Some of the best collaboration programs which have been able to hit scale have their own workflow tools in terms of how the team really operates. It just has a lot of compounding value to it, not year to year, but week to week, month to month, in terms of the effectiveness it's able to drive. But that's the first thing you're looking to solve for as soon as you think capability is you look for a team which is experienced. You want them to have their own offline networks, which is there, and you want to equip them with the right technology tools to get the job done. Now, as that happens, the next question becomes is the first principles. How would this team really build businesses out? I think one thing that you would notice with any of the programs that you would have heard a lot about, or you would hear people talking about, and hence what we call as successful, is that these programs are very, very heavily customized to meet a certain set of objectives. They have a very specific positioning within the company. They have a very specific positioning in the external ecosystem, and they have a very clear set of KPIs which are there. And you would see a good amount of variation which is there, right? So take for example a Cisco. They run a 6 month program is because they do a lot of work with hardware startups. And that ends up requiring certain gestation time to even make iterations which are there. Some of their companies are pretty far out in terms of Horizon 3 from a technology perspective, where again, if you want to make an iteration, you have to give a fair amount of time to the entrepreneurs to even make a change which is there. Someone like Microsoft has been running a 6 month program is because they want to eventually take the startups from a co-sell perspective to their end customers. They want to be really sure about the integration. They want to be really sure about pitching. They want to be really sure about the business prospects of the company. So they take good 6 months to really fine tune the business to get the integrations done because eventually what they're doing is preparing the startup to be available to a host of people in sales and services to be taken to customers not just in India but globally. Now, if you see counter to that, somebody like a Target only runs a 4 month non-curriculum POC based program which is there, and their whole focus is to say that look, I need a set of outcomes to be delivered within those 6 months, and more often than not, these are license vendor agreements that they would end up signing with, right? So they are really focused on solving the core problem. They don't have to worry about the hardware side of things because also these are slightly more mature companies. They don't have to worry about joint GTM sales coachings because it's eventually going to be consumed internally by Target. So if the stakeholders, convinced, it's perfectly fine. What you really want is a working solution. Now, similar objectives, similar constructs, but if you see, different approaches when it comes to say Microsoft versus Cisco, because here the companies are very, very different. Or if you look at a Target versus Microsoft, both want outcomes, but very different kind of outcomes, very different kind of executions which are there. The element of customization becomes more important is because it allows you to solve for a lot of internal and external challenges proactively, which is there. Now, the first things first is that as you're designing these particular programs, what you want to do is you want to look at your collaboration program as a two-sided platform, right? It has two customers, it has internal stakeholders, and it has startups who are your customers. Going back to the previous slide which I showed, where this is a particular team which is helping rest of the organization and creating its network outside the organization to get the job done. Both have to be seen as customers because that's the only way you would be able to really solve the problem. And that's the job the collaboration team does. Now, why do I use the word customer? See, a lot of common challenges you would have heard, or read in reports is to say that the corporate moves very, very slowly. They take too much time taking decision. They're not able to really commit to the POC. I did not get the right resources that I wanted. Very common problems that startups talk about, right? On the flip side, the team says that hey, the startup wasn't really mature. I could not do much with it. I wrote to them. They did not respond for 4 weeks. They don't seem to be interested. We are such a big company. Why are they not working with us? Or just something as simple as saying that I'm a big company. You should do this POC for me for free. Those things don't really work, right? And the reason those things don't work is because they are far from reality, which is there. What the collaboration team does is, as they look at both the sides as customers, their core job is to solve these problems effectively. And at the core, what they're doing is they're able to design a very custom program. So, take for example, um, a firm which is in automotive, which wants to accelerate product innovation, already has a set of people working on different kind of activities, and assume this is a new team which is there. Odds are, when you talk about startup collaboration, the first question they would have is that why are we doing this? Why can't we build it internally? Now, how do you really solve that problem is something which the program does. Similarly, when you go out into the startup ecosystem, you're not the only automotive major going after that particular startup. There are like five other companies who want to attract with that startup. It becomes really important for you to be able to pitch to them as to why you startup should work with me today versus my peers. Like why should I be the first port of call? And that's what customization really solves for, emitting from the core pieces of two people being the customers which are there. Now, the first piece, as you're solving for that customization, which we always say is that you can have endless set of customers on both the sides. You can have the whole 10,000 startups, which are your potential customers, so to say, or you can have 40,000 people in the company being your potential customers, right? Doesn't really work for us. So the first thing the team has to do is to start segmenting the market out there and figure out who's the real customer. The thing you want to really do here is, while you may want to work and involve every single person in the company to be part of the startup program, that may not be possible. So you have to start from one patch where you have the most set of sponsors or supporters which are there. In an Indian construct, what we have seen, especially with GCOEs, is that operation excellence, new product services, and customer experience, three usually become the first port of call within the company to figure out, what can we do with startups. If you are a GBS, excellence becomes a very, very core part. If you are a R&D center or a ER&D center specifically, it's a lot to do with about new products and services which are there. The key is to find one anchor with whom you can really build out in terms of the startup program. Now, as you choose that initial set of stakeholders whom you're building with, you work with them to figure out what kind of collaboration model really makes sense. In case of operational excellence, odds are license and vendor agreement would make a lot more sense than anything else. In case of new products and services, it could be platform, license, or joint GTM, which is there, right? Now, this is the second level of anchoring, which is very, very important. But if you see here, also your team is already in sync with what you want to do. What this eventually does is it ends up creating a filter for the startup ecosystem. If it's going to be joint GTM, odds are you will say that, hey, I want a mid stage or a growth stage company. I'm going to be taking it to my customers. I need a certain quality of confidence which is there. Whereas if it's a co-innovation piece, you want a lot more flexibility with the startup in terms of being able to figure out the POC itself. You have to purpose go for a prototype stage company or a growth stage company, because here they would still be open to making changes. As soon as they reach a mid stage, they're focused on scale, they're focused on repeatability. Also, they'll not be really keen to try out a new product or a new service out there or co-innovate on something, unless the team is designed that way. So this is where the flow starts to happen. You start to anchor on the first set of customers who you cannot change. You figure out, what kind of collaboration makes most sense for them, and then that ends up defining what part of the startup ecosystem you're really going to focus on, and you get your second set of customers which are there. Now this is where your designing starts to really happen in terms of saying, okay, how do I, attract these startups? How do I keep engaging these particular corporate stakeholders? But the framework allows you to cut the customers into specific segments which you want to really focus on. The reason that focus is very, very important is because one of the biggest problems for any startup collaboration program in the world is the fact that the Intel folks have not really participated. They're not really committed to doing something. There's a lot of lip service. There's not enough action. By creating a custom program, what you're trying to drive home is the confidence that, look, folks, we know we have failed before or we have not tried this before. It's important for us to do it, but we can succeed. Our program has taken a lot of context into play, and we can really succeed. Also, as soon as you are able to create that kind of a movement, you will be able to create a strong value proposition which allows you to attract more entrepreneurs, gives you a choice in terms of who you want to work with, and consequently have very specific deeper engagements because you have a confidence that I'm working with some of the best people out there in terms of startups and entrepreneurs. Now, odds are that if you're really going in deep, there will be improved odds of success. You will have tangible outcomes coming in. And as soon as you start talking about these tangible outcomes, as soon as you start talking about these success stories, the first thing you will notice is that a lot more people want to get associated with the program because they've seen this playbook work. They feel that this initiative can become successful. And who does not want to associate themselves with success? That is a very, very strong organizational behavior that you are really trying to activate for yourself. This flywheel, as soon as more people want to associate with the program, you have a lot more opportunities that you can start unlocking, and consequently the flywheel keeps getting accelerated over a period of time. Regardless of what budget you started, regardless of what format you started, this is the core flywheel that we really believe that companies need to focus on as they start creating their collaboration programs. And this is a flywheel which will take you from one country to 10 countries, from one startup to 1,000 startups. We have seen this work a lot in organizations, but this is the center of it. This is the heart of it from a customization, from an execution perspective. Now, if you do it, keep doing it properly, odds are over time your value contribution will keep on increasing. Odds are as your experience is increasing, your ability to work with startups will keep on changing. And eventually, what you get into is a disruptive state, as we call it, where simply put, what you're being able to do is you're able to very quickly and very repetitively figure out the new opportunities that the company needs to work on. As soon as the opportunity is figured out, you're very quickly able to figure out which is the relevant startup, not just in a geography but globally. You are very effectively able to figure out how to work with them in terms of what kind of POCs and constructs which are there. And then eventually what you have is the output basis which you start, iterating the whole cycle. The disruptive stage is basically which is location agnostic, which is stage agnostic, which ends up focusing and reducing time at each of these steps to bare minimum possible, which is there. And that's the evolution that you're looking at. Your scale of opportunities you're going after changes. You're looking at startups across the world that you're engaging with. All of this at the core is the flywheel, because as you keep showing outcomes, the budget increases. As more people get participative into the organization to work with startups, you have a lot more opportunities opening up. And that's the transition, that's the evolution you want to really look at. As a final piece from our side, just to summarize, when you think about collaboration programs, think of them as two-sided platforms. You want to solve for internal stakeholders. You also want to start for startups. You'll have to put in the effort to keep both of them engaged. And how do you do it? Essentially, be sure that you have right KPI set up. You have success criteria set up, which allow you to solve a lot of things internally. You only want to focus on things which are super important to people, because they would be doing this in addition to their day work, so you don't want to really make it feel burdensome for them. So pick up areas which are aligned to their core KPIs, which are aligned ideally to their own promotions which are there. Onboard these stakeholders early on so that you have the right sponsors. There are two pieces here. One piece is just the optics of it. So whenever a CX ends up saying that, hey, this startup program is important to us, it just rallies people really well. Any leader saying it rallies the people. So who are those key leaders who can rally people? Then who are those key leaders who can take both knowledge and power-based decisions to be able to give no go, a go no go in terms of POC, to be able to comment on the quality of the POC that we are executing on. And then finally, as you bring all these three things together, you want to create a very, very strong pitch to the startups to say that, look, we are not unlike other corporates. We are not here to, just bring you in a room for a presentation, not give you any feedback. Also, we might say no to you, after you talk to our leaders, but we'll give you no very, very quickly. And should we say yes in terms of what we want to do with you? I've got a very strong value proposition. In the short term, I can help you in terms of refining your product, give you some cash to get the POC done. But in the long term, we are talking about a couple of $1 million of revenue. That's the kind of value proposition you want to really start building for yourself. Eventually, do assume that if it's a good startup, every corporate in the world wants to work with them. How are you going to differentiate yourself? It's a very similar piece that you see with talent. A great engineer is always in demand. There's always talent shortage for great people. It's similar with startup ecosystem. Great startups are always short of bandwidth in terms of what they need to do and what they want to do, or what somebody else wants them to do. Finally, to wrap things up, from a GCOE perspective, what we have seen consistently is a certain set of the common challenges which don't help them move forward. Um, and the question for us is that how do we change that particular status quo, right? So some of the pieces that we see is that saying that, hey, look, our leadership doesn't have any exposure to India, or saying that, we are already investing in Israel, the startups there are really really great. I don't think we'll get any bandwidth in India. Or to say that, look, we already have an existing program, at the headquarters, but they're not really looking to expand into India. I can't start something all over. Or even a bigger challenge is to say that the team wants me to deploy the exact playbook from Europe into the Indian ecosystem, but I don't see it succeeding. We don't know how to really, get the narrative changed. Each of those problems has a solution. Each of those challenges has a workaround in terms of how to solve for it. And broadly, what we have seen is we have seen three things work really well for companies. When you are trying to build out the interest, for the program, what we call as observe and orient. What really you really want to do here is to sort of build confidence about the ecosystem, and you want to really do that from two three perspectives. Not only share the reports which come out into the ecosystem on the country, but potentially think of doing smaller format sessions where you want to walk them through what are the key trends into the ecosystem. Number one, typically followed up with very in some kind of a round table or interaction with the entrepreneurs and the investors in the ecosystem, somebody outside the company. We have seen those two things work really well in terms of building the confidence. You definitely want the leaders to go and talk to people outside the company. You want to orchestrate that, because once they hear themselves, once they see themselves, it's a very different perspective, it's a very different position in which they are to take a decision. In scenarios where you already have a existing collaboration program or a CVC or open innovation program out there in the world, and for whatever reason the team is not looking to replicate it, I think the key and the fundamental piece to do is to say that, look, you have an existing program, let it really run. That's perfectly fine. But what we can do as a GIC is we can actively contribute in terms of creating a pipeline for your existing initiative. Now, what this really does is it gives you a very systematic process to be able to work with global, to be able to work with startups. You're able to convey a very clear messaging to the startups when you go out there and talk to them. You're able to create a very clear messaging to the global in terms of what your role is going to be. But just the fact that you're part of the information chain, it allows the GIC to get a lot more exposure and a lot more opportunities to start expanding into what they really want to do. It gives team a very, very good set of exposure in terms of how the decision making is happening and what the ecosystem has to offer, because you're doing this consistently. You're not just doing, immersion sessions. You are part of day-to-day activities. And then finally, for those who have the global buy-in, who are really committed to doing this, I think I would say that the first and foremost thing is to focus on designing your own program, on customizing that program. You don't want to do a lift and shift. You want to do the design phase in a as immersive and deep a way possible. Is because not only are you trying to figure out what your program should look like in terms of operational elements, it's also a great opportunity to align people in terms of what will be the program all about. What are the metrics that you want to measure the program about? Why do you want to really give a certain kind of resources? Why should certain group of people provide a certain amount of time frame or time commitment to the program? The design phase is something which we have seen to be extremely important for every company in terms of not just deciding what they want to do, but also driving a lot of alignment within the organization from execution perspective, and just making their life a lot more easier as they go forward. And with that, thank you so much. I'll maybe open up the floor for questions that you may have. Prashant, let me know if you have seen any questions coming in.
So we
Uh,
have got few. Atit, am I audible?
yes, Prashant.
Great. So we have got few questions. One of the questions that I wanted to ask, and what the audience wanted to ask was, how do corporates go about selecting the right startup to collaborate with? What are some of the criterias which GCOE should consider?
I would say the selection process will depend on two fundamental things. One is, uh, you know what is it that the company is trying to achieve, and second is in what kind of time frame which is there. Uh, what do I mean by this? Number one is, if you're looking for, say, a joint go-to-market kind of opportunity, then odds are you will be putting that startup in front of your customer, and hence your your methodology for curation should be biased for companies which are already stable and have a certain amount of revenue already coming in, which is there. So you want to really customize it in terms of what is your end objective and the sector that you're going out with. If it's going to be open innovation, sorry, if it's going to be co-innovation kind of a mandate where it's a completely new problem statement you're trying out with, then you really want to focus only on the technical powers of the company. You're not really worried too much about, what kind of revenue they're doing, because the core objective is to experiment or to run certain number of experiments in terms of trying out different hypotheses which are there. And should something work, then you're open to doing something a lot more. So I would say you want to really customize it, or you want to uh, decide basis what your end objective is and what kind of time frame you're looking at.
Great, thanks, Atit. Another question that came from the audience was, how can a large corporate gain leadership buy in order to launch a startup collaboration program?
I think at the core of it will be three questions to answer. One is, why India, why now, and how do we really go about doing it? That's what we have seen in a classic business case. End of the day, we have to definitely talk about the Indian startup ecosystem and why it is ready for us to tap into today. So there's a fair bit of case building on that particular front. I think what we want to really send out as a message to the larger group is the fact that, look, it is worth doing and we can be really successful in terms of giving those outcomes. At the same time, balance it a bit in terms of not really promising a spectacular outcome in the first or the second year. Remember, innovation programs have their own gestation period in terms of capability, but you want to really focus on making it, achievable, making it very, very real, and sort of showing that this is now the time to do it. The second part where we focus a lot in terms of doing is that how will we do it, and that's where we want to really try and help them visualize that should they decide to launch this particular program, what kind of timeline we're looking at, what kind of investment are we asking from them, what would be the initial set of KPIs that they would need to measure in terms of knowing if the project is going right on track or not. Odds are they already see the value of working with startups. I think in most cases, what we have seen with the companies is either the ignorance about the startup ecosystem and what it can do becomes a problem, or they are very set in terms of how they look at startups, and you need to change the language. But in both those cases, the third part, saying that, okay, will we even be really successful in terms of doing this, become the core reason why they say no to a particular initiative. So those are three things you want to really keep in mind as you think about that pitch to global.
Another question that has come, by the way, Atit, we got one of the feedback which I wanted to share. It's a good presentation, very relevant for the corporates to rethink in the framework for their startup engagement strategy. One of the feedback that we got. Another question that attendees have asked, and I'll take it. So one of the challenges for, and I'm reading it as we have got it. One of the challenges for corporate VC is the differentiation and sustainability of the startups. When you couple this with the relatively lower valuation in comparison to a similar startup in the US, the skeptical voices become louder. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm guessing what the question means is that the valuation in India is higher than valuation in US, and that's what's making things difficult. Is
Yeah, when you couple this with a relatively lower valuation in comparison to a similar startup in US, the
okay.
skeptical voices becomes louder.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. To your point, yes, odds are the valuation in India will be lower compared to US, which is there, and there's a reason for this. The thing is, for example, if I look at this one simple pen, right? The price point at which we end up selling this pen in India is going to be so different than the price point in US, right? And valuation is the mathematical formula which is a multiple on the value of this particular pen. So odds are always high that because of per capita GDP, even on PPP basis, we are so far apart. Valuation in a US market will always be more. The other reason why these valuations are more is because VCs have a set formula in terms of how they invest in a company. So interestingly, a seed round in India, in US, in China will be very similar. All of them will take 15% equity, let's say. But the check size is very different because that check size is defined by the cost of hiring talent. So in Valley, it might be $2 million. In India, it would be $400,000. In China, it might be like $4 million, right? So in that sense, these valuations technically are very, very wrong indicators in terms of what the company is really worth. Um, and that is a bias you want to really solve for. So, for example, corp devs, CVCs, which are not really aware of Indian ecosystem, what to your point will end up doing is when they're trying to filter a company, they'll do a filter of seeing descending order of funding raised. Effective when you're starting the work, but not really effective when you want to close a deal. In those constructs, what has really worked in terms of my experience is the fact that we start telling narrative about that particular startup in terms of the construct in which it has succeeded and the construct in which it is growing. So a lot of business case building ends up happening from a perspective saying that look, it's not really about the valuation. This is where the fault is, and you very quickly change the metric to something else, or the discussion point to revenues, or something like customer success, right? What percentage of the team of the business has been recurring? What percentage of clients have really grown from a value perspective? You shift the metric to something which talks about operational excellence, about quality of the product, not just the valuation. That's the concept which has worked really well for us, but I do relate with you. It does become a problem if somebody is not really committed to the ecosystem. It becomes a very, very easy excuse to say that, hey, India is far behind. This is where I think stories really help, narratives really help, say of InMobi, or of Freshdesk, or of Zoho, or say for example someone like a Dhruva also, for that matter, right? I think it's good to have some of these narratives up the sleeve and saying that look, this company uh, was in similar state, but look at its valuation today. Those narratives at least help me a lot for sure.
Great. Thanks. Atit, we'll take one last question. How can corporate startup partnership navigate crises like COVID-19 pandemic and the great recession that happened in 2007-8?
Um, okay, so interesting piece. In terms of COVID-19, I think we have barely seen any of the existing programs close down. In most cases, the teams have been able to expand their programs because what they had was a core capability of being able to tap into the external ecosystem. The ones who were successful in terms of really adding value during this period to their organization were also the firms which were sorry, so the teams which are very well connected with their internal folks, who are able to say that look, our business priorities have suddenly shifted. What was not a problem earlier has become a problem. What was not an opportunity has become an opportunity, and we really want to figure out how to tap into it. So what we have seen is that odds are in a crisis. You are short on resources. You have to act quickly. What will be extremely critical is how the information flows, how the decisions are made, and of course, what options do you have in play. In such a construct, invariably something like an innovation program or a collaboration program will become your advantage, provided that team has the right set of inputs coming into them for them to really act on. But I think if you look at just how India has responded in terms of, unfortunately, the narrative has changed a lot in the last 2 months. But if you look at the positives which have happened, or what we're doing today from the whole oxygen supply perspective, right? What you will find is that people have been leveraging multiple networks to solve the problem. So there are startups today which are focused in terms of creating oxygen concentrators as we speak, right? Or who are trying to figure out how to lay copper cabling very quickly, or how to have on-site oxygen generation. But all those folks are really working with like 5 different entities out there to get the job done. So yeah, as long as we solve for information flow, decision flow, uh, uh, these programs end up becoming very, very big advantage to the company during crisis.